Groups are a fundamental part of the way Windows Server operating systems and Active Directory work to provide a secure environment. So you can bet that understanding groups is going to be vital on this exam. So let's dive in. I'm going to give you the basics here. Really, this is kind of a review video. If any of this, you've totally forgotten it, it sounds like a new idea to you, then you definitely need to go out there and read up on groups a little bit and play with them. Make sure you got this down, because you're going to see this in a lot of different forms on the exam. Now, there are two types of groups in Windows Server 2012. Security groups, and when somebody uses the word group, this is usually what they mean. These are groups that we can apply permissions to, use to provide that secure environment. A distribution group is kind of rare in most people's implementations of Active Directory, and this is a group whose members can receive email messages that are sent to the group. Now, the reason I say they're rare, we use this kind of functionality, but usually over in an Exchange environment. But just know what a distribution group is, and you'll be fine for the exam. Now, there are 4 group scopes in Active Directory domain services, and you need to understand these. The first is machine local, then domain local, then global, and universal. So let's take a look at each one of these. The first one, the machine local, these are groups that apply only to objects that are local to a machine in which they exist. These were used widely in earlier versions of Windows networking. They're really designed to be used on standalone environments, so you don't see them very much anymore. The domain local group is a set of groups that you can use to establish security permissions on resources local to the domain. Now notice this is kind of the grown-up version of a machine local, except these are local anywhere inside the domain. So if you got a resource on a machine in the domain, you want to use a domain local group to provide the security permissions to particular resources. Now, a domain local group, make sure you get this part, can contain the following types of members. We can put global groups inside a domain local group. We can put user accounts in that domain local group. We can put universal groups into that domain local group. And we can put other domain local groups inside there. And we primarily use these domain local groups to provide access to resources. So you'll see quite a few domain local groups. Next up is global groups. Now, global groups can contain user accounts and other global groups. But a global group can only contain other global groups from within its own domain. Well, more about that in just a few minutes. Now, we use global groups primarily to sort users into easily identifiable groups, and then we place those global groups into domain local groups that have been provided permissions, and by dropping that global group into that domain local group, we automatically give those permissions to the members of the global group. So as a result, in a network where I work, I might be in the sales global group, I might be in the troubleshooters global group, I might be in the public relations global group, I might be in the Wednesday night bowling league global group. I'm in as many groups as I need to be in, global groups that is, that will kind of segregate me out into different levels of permissions that I might need generally. And then by placing that global group in the domain local groups, they give me permissions to the various resources I need. Universal groups are a special animal. They can contain objects from any trusted domain. That means they're cross-domain. Now, these can be used to apply permissions to any resource in the domain or in any domain. Now, why not use universal groups for everything? Some of you are thinking, wait a minute, Mark, what was the point of all this machine local, domain local, and all that other junk? I'm just going to use universal groups, put everybody in there, everybody's fine. Well, the problem is replication. For cross-domain security to function correctly, the membership of a universal group has to be replicated across the entire forest, and every time you make a change, that change has to be replicated. So when you get a lot of universal groups out there, you're going to notice replication traffic increasing substantially. So you want to use universal groups only when cross-domain permissions are required, and you want to limit the amount of them generally. You don't have to treat these things like, they're real expensive, But just watch this, especially on the exam. They're going to treat universal groups like they're a very special deal. It's kind of like the fine family china, if you know what I'm talking about. So all you really need to know to keep groups straight can be boiled down to this simple trick, AGLP. Accounts, by that I mean user accounts, get placed into global groups. We're going to group the users into as many categories as we need. Then the global groups are placed into domain local groups, or L, local groups. And we're going to create a local group for every resource and permission level that we need. And then permissions get applied to that local group, that domain local group. And as a result, by simply dropping users into the different global groups, since the global groups are members of the local groups, and since the local groups have permissions on them, we can simply move our users amongst our global groups, and we're changing their permissions. And anytime we need a new set of permissions, we create a new global group to segregate those users needing that permission, and then we drop them into a domain local group that has those permissions applied. Pretty straightforward, really cool. Just remember AGLP. If you get that, you can figure out pretty much any question on groups on the exam. So make sure you understand groups and you're comfortable with them, and you should be able to pick your way through all the exam questions just fine.